Well, how's it going, guys? Thank you so much for tuning in to another weather video. I'm just going to be totally upfront with each and every one of you. In tracking Hurricane Lee, this has been one of the biggest roller coaster rides as a forecaster that I've ever been on. This system, 2 days ago, was a Category 5, and at the time, we were talking about it being one of the strongest Category 5s potentially on record in the Atlantic. I mean, some of the models before the reconnaissance missions went out were showing the pressure getting as down as 900 millibars with winds of sustained 200 miles per hour. Of course, that didn't happen, but it still produced a Category 5. Okay, that was 2 days ago. Yesterday, it weakened due to a lot of shear that was coming out of the south. And this actually was fed into the lower levels of the hurricane and really eroded a lot of the eye in the center of this system. And it got down to a Category 3. Even despite that, as of this morning, it's maintained its major status. We've been hinting at this scenario over the last couple of days, but we are expecting this hurricane to potentially get back up to a Category 5 by this weekend, if not as soon as tomorrow. So this really has been a up and down roller coaster ride of tracking this thing. And on top of that, what's going to happen beyond this weekend into early next week? To be honest with you, we really still don't know. We know that it's probably going to track to the north, or actually we know that to be a fact because we have a troughing feature out in the United States here, which we'll talk about here later on in the video. That's expected to steer this north. But what happens within the New England area and the eastern provinces of Canada, still don't really know. There's a lot of model uncertainty. We're going to talk about all of that in today's video and just kind of recap what has happened with Hurricane Lee over the last 24 to 48 hours. I mean, in all honesty, guys, this may be one of the first hurricanes on record to rapidly intensify, then rapidly de-intensify, and then rapidly intensify again within such a short time period. Again, we're going to cover all of this as well as the potential impacts to the New England and Northeast regions. Again, a lot of uncertainty there still as of today on Saturday. So if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel, share with family and friends, like this video, and with that being said, let's get right into the forecast. So we are going to begin by first taking a look at the water vapor imagery in the upper levels, sort of like how we've done the last few videos. And as you can see, just behind Hurricane Lee is Tropical Storm Margot, which is continuing to build up its convection, is expected to be a fishy storm, as that will move off to the north at some point this weekend and become our next hurricane. But our main focus, of course, right now is Hurricane Lee. And as I talked about at the top of the video, it's undergone some weakening. It's been battling some shear from the southwest, which we'll touch on here in a moment. But over the last couple of days, we were sort of concerned about the dry air aloft on our water vapor imagery. And as I expected, that has meandered to the west and is sort of condensed and sort of contracted back over towards Cuba and the Dominican Republic. So water vapor isn't a concern here whatsoever. This storm has a very favorable environment at the moment, with the exception of the wind shear, which still poses a problem right now for its redevelopment. This right here is taking a look at the University of Wisconsin's wind shear product. And just so we can all see it, here is Hurricane Lee. It at one point was a Category 5. You could clearly see on satellite with that beautiful eye that it had. And look at our wind vectors. Watch the motion, right? You have southerly wind vector, southwesterly flow, and I apologize, it's moving relatively fast, but if you can follow me here for a second, this is southwesterly flow moving into the hurricane. And as a matter of fact, this wind shear was on the order of 10 to 20 knots. So this red demarcation that you're seeing is noting unfavorable environment. And yesterday it was dealing with a lot of southwesterly wind shear, again, 20 to 25 knots, to where we saw the convection on the outer western flank really being inhibited by that. And it weakened it down to a Category 3 hurricane. So it still is dealing with that southwesterly shear. That is not expected to change. And we're going to be talking about the models during this discussion at some point, probably towards the end of the video. Again, we will have chapters in between. Some of the models, like the Euro, are showing that shear staying pretty consistent throughout the day and even getting into early Sunday morning. However, the GFS, on the other hand, is showing that beginning to meander and weaken. So here's the latest discussion from the National Hurricane Center. I'm going to read some of this out to you here. It says that Lee seems to be recovering from the effects of the strong southwesterly shear. The central dense overcast has expanded with periodic bursts of deep convection and increased lightning activity near the center. So we saw a lot of lightning activity yesterday, and we're also seeing that again today. And also they go on to say that the infrared satellite may be hinting at the return of Lee's eye. This next part I gotta say is really, really interesting. Overnight, there were multiple reports from NOAA and Air Force Reserve Hurricane Hunter aircraft of mesovortices orbiting the closed elliptical eye wall. Due to safety considerations, the aircraft were unable at times to penetrate the eye wall, and thus we have no new in situ information about the intensity or minimum central pressure. In other words, it was deemed unsafe due to those multiple mesovortices to actually cross and fly through. So they are going to be sending another reconnaissance mission out this morning. And as a matter of fact, we have that new data right now that we're going to be going over with you guys as of this morning. But what they were able to measure is that the initial intensity is held at a somewhat uncertain 100 knots. And NOAA and Air Force Reserve missions, as I mentioned, are scheduled to investigate Lee later this morning. It then goes on to say that confidence in the intensity forecast remains low. The global model suggests that Lee could be affected by strong to moderate southwesterly shear for at least the next day. This next paragraph goes into what I just mentioned, which is that the GFS and the Euro are in a lot of disagreement about sort of what happens with the shear going forward. Here's the next part that's interesting. Lee is moving west-northwest at 295 degrees, 10 knots. 10 knots. This system has slowed down yet again. It is starting to slow down. And whenever hurricanes slow down, as we talked about in yesterday's video, can have implications on the forecast and its trajectory going forward beyond early next week. So the fact that this continues to slow down is just adding more uncertainty to what happens with this as it eventually is expected to make a more northern turn. It then goes on to say that, what was I going to say here? By next Wednesday, the hurricane should gradually turn to the northwest and north-northwest, as I mentioned, in the flow between a trough over the eastern United States and the southwestern edge of the ridge. While the model guidance is in good agreement about the general synoptic setup, there remains differences in how far west Lee will move before it makes the turn. Again, Hurricane Lee has slowed down. It continues to move in the same trajectory that we've talked about the last couple of days, in that west-northwest trajectory. So we know that the synoptic pattern in place is going to have a troughing feature come down from the upper Midwest through the upper Great Lakes and eventually into the Northeast, which should steer this to the Northeast. But here's the thing. That ridge, that area of high pressure out in the Atlantic, is expected to steer it north. That troughing feature was then supposed to turn it to the northeast and away from land. Well, if this slows down, then the biggest question is, how much does that trough play a role at this point? If that trough is expected to move through around Monday, Tuesday, and it's not even making that northerly turn until Wednesday, well, then it's going to miss most of the effects of that shortwave troughing feature, and now you're talking about a system that's just going to move directly north or slightly north-northwest. So that's why there's a lot of questions here. We know for a fact it's going to continue its northern turn at some point. It's going to stay on its west-northwest trajectory and then eventually turn north. What happens beyond that point is still a major question mark even as of this weekend. So here's what we have. Speaking of which, we have the latest reconnaissance mission. And this is the Air Force plane that flew through. It just did its crossover. We hope that it actually got some more information from the center. It looks like it has. It might be attempting to do one more go-around in order to get some more information on that cross-section of the center. What these hurricane hunters try to do is really take a cross-sectional analysis of any tropical system, as much detail as they can get, from the outer band strength really to the center of the system. And the goal is to get to the center of the hurricane so that way they can deploy an instrument called a drop sonde. And just like what the name implies, they literally take this instrument and drop it down, right, off the plane. And that measures very critical data of the center of our hurricane, which this is what the dropson collected. So exactly how it plays out, right? You drop it from the upper levels, and if we're talking about pressure, right, pressure reference level would be closer to the surface. Our 700 would be up with height. So if you were to follow the dropson, right, it's going to essentially start here at the 700 and drop down closer to the surface. And then by the time we get to about 1,000 millibars, which is more of our surface reference level, that's when we start to lose some of that data. So the most critical point of our data is anywhere between the 700 millibar height from the time it was dropped going all the way down closer to the surface. Here is what's interesting, right? We do have RH values, right, about 100, very saturated air column as we get down closer to the surface. But the one thing that's changed is keep an eye on this little area here. You see how your temperature and your dew point split off? That's really trying to indicate more of the high pressure that sits above, right? So we have cyclonic flow towards the surface of our hurricanes, and then we have anticyclonic flow aloft. That anticyclonic flow is our divergence. So with hurricanes, we have convergence at the surface, our air column goes in the vertical, and then we have divergence aloft, right? So we would expect that our temperature, right, we would expect that our dew point would veer off and our temperature would veer off as well. And by the way, that's indicated by our height level. So we are seeing on our cloud tops, which we'll talk about here in a second, very cold cloud tops. That indicates deep convection. But what this split off and this deviation tells us between our dew point and our temperature is that is essentially hinting at sort of the, not the stadium effect, but some of that anticyclonic flow aloft. Now, this wasn't as extreme as what we saw with our Category 5 to where this split off literally just above the surface. That was a very intense eye wall. Instead, we're seeing just a very minute subsidence field right at the 700 millibar level. So again, what this is indicating to us as forecasters is this dew point and depression, the dew point and the temperature deviation is showing us potentially some anticyclonic flow aloft, which is a healthy sign for any hurricane. That is showing that it's trying to get its act together and trying to restructure and reorganize itself. Wanted to point that out because, guys, this information is very critical, because what's going to happen is what the hurricane hunters find from these dropsons is fed right back in the models, and those models can correct and then sort of give us a new pathing for where we expect this system to go, how far west it's going to go, for how long, as well as what happens beyond, say, the weekend. Is it going to continue to take a northerly turn? Is it going to veer off to the northeast? These dropsons give us the most precise and up-to-the-date information possible that buoys can't do, and that's fed right back into the models, and that will help the models correct and reestablish. Now, here is the latest infrared satellite. The National Hurricane Center did hint at this. You can tell by your cloud tops, not as robust as what we saw with the Category 5, but let's not mistake ourselves. This is still very deep convection. We don't have an eye quite yet, at least on infrared. It was trying to get one going late last night, but it struggled a lot with that shear. You can see these outer bands. You see these little squiggles that happen? That's actually showing our outer bands interacting with wind shear. So that is telling us right now that this hurricane is still dealing with plenty of wind shear from the southwest. You saw that on the Wisconsin map, and I do apologize if it's moving relatively fast, but if you see these little spins or these swirls on the outer band of a hurricane, that is telling us that it is currently dealing with wind shear. This eye wall has yet to be reinvigorated just yet. We still do have deep convection around the center, so this storm is still really trying to get its act together despite the strong southwesterly shear vectors. So the anticipation is that this shear is expected to taper off as we get into Sunday, to where we can see this thing re-intensify and ramp up beyond, say, a Category 3, potentially Cat 4, and then in the most extreme case, a Category 5 for the second time in its cycle. Here is the GFS interpretation going forward. This is as of 6Z. Nothing has really changed except for its west-northwest duration. The GFS is now picking up on the fact that it will probably go west-northwest, away from the Aleutian Islands, away from the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico for a little bit longer. If you guys remember the last couple of days, the initial track was showing it veer off to the north quicker than what was expected. But now, as of today, that's expected to slow down. We may not even see that turn until Thursday. So, again, this has implications for where it goes beyond the tropics, right? When we're talking about Maine, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and even parts of New England, this is something that we seriously have to watch, because the fact that it's slowed down, that means that you guys are not out of the woods here. I mean, before, I know this was showing it move away from the shoreline for the most part of the East Coast. But guys, because the models are now getting fed in new information from our recon missions, as well as getting closer to that time step of next week, we're starting to see a little bit more clarity in our spread, which we'll talk about towards the end of the video. And the GFS really does a great job at representing that by showing this slowdown near Jamaica, and then eventually finally turning to the northwest, and then eventually just straight north. So we have to keep a close eye on this, guys. Keep in mind, this is still very far out. There's a lot of things that still need to be resolved. We're going to keep covering this every single day until we get to the end date of this system. But the thing that concerns me is that these waters are still supportive enough to where we could potentially see a hurricane still as it bears down closer and closer and closer to these Canadian provinces and far eastern portions of New England. The European model also agrees with that sentiment. It doesn't show it really making its track north because it's only going out 90 hours, but the agreement is that it is slowing down, and we are expecting it to re-intensify. The Euro on the more conservative end showing it at a 955. If you look at the halves models, they're showing it at a 915 to 922. So there is still variation in the strength. If it can undergo rapid intensification, which I expect it to once it makes its way past the northern portions of the Leeward Islands, not going to be out of the question to see it back to a Cat 4, if not a Cat 5 at all. I mean, that's certainly in the cards. And guys, like I said, I mean, I know it's still far out, but for our folks in New England, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, we really have to keep an eye on this and take this seriously. Don't take any precautions just yet. Again, your advice should always be heeded by local officials, not myself. And there hasn't been any warning from them yet. It's still very far out. What I would advise folks in this region of the country and for Canada is to just continue to keep an eye on it. We are not out of the woods yet. This is not a fish storm at all. It is right now, but as far as the next week is concerned, a lot of questions still remain here. Here's the latest track, guys. And if you've been keeping track of what the National Hurricane Center has been putting out, you can really underscore the uncertainty, right? This is your cone of uncertainty, expected to be a major once we get into Sunday. But then as we get towards Wednesday's Thursday, remember, it wasn't supposed to make this turn until Tuesday. It was supposed to be a lot earlier. Now, the models are showing a slowing down of Hurricane Lee to where it delays that movement to the north-northwest. So there is a ton of uncertainty even getting into this week, and that's sort of delaying the potential of this getting closer to the East Coast because of the fact that it's slowing down. So this cone of uncertainty really underscores that, guys. There's a lot of things that still need to be resolved between now and even late next week. And here's our current spaghetti spread. What's interesting is if we go all the way back to this past week, and this is a really great example of why you don't put all your eggs in one basket with a weather model, because things can change. If you remember, the GEFS was not showing this many members getting into New England. Right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, nearly 7 of the members that are taking it more in this uncertainty north-northwest trajectory into New England and Long Island. That is still a lot of uncertainty, right? Look at the spread. It has it going into New Jersey, one has going into Maine, the other one has it off the coast of Long Island, the other one has a direct impact on Long Island. So this whole spread shows how uncertain we are. If you were playing any word game throughout this video today, the word uncertainty probably came up a good 12 times, right? And I mean that. There is a lot of spread here, which tells us our confidence is very low. There is very high confidence, however, that it is expected to make more of a northeasterly turn, eventually getting towards Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. I would tell you, though, that we can't count out a landfall here, guys. I know it is still very far out. A lot of things have to be resolved. But what I've noticed in the trend is that we've had now even more members hinting at the U.S. being impacted by this directly. So we need to continue to track this, continue to stay tuned to these videos, and be sure if you have any questions, post them down in the comments below. Also, if you know anybody that's in New England and the Northeast, and for our Canadian friends in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, be sure to like the stream. Be sure to share this with them. And I didn't mean to say stream. I meant to say like the video, share the video, and be sure to subscribe to the channel because we are going to be doing updates every single day over the next week on Hurricane Lee, as well as other activity that is expected to happen off the coast of Africa over that same time span. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as I said before, if you do enjoy today's video, be sure to like, subscribe, share with family and friends who might be impacted by the effects of Hurricane Lee. And we will see you tomorrow on our next video.